The life of a Roman slave was one of relentless toil, endless suffering, and a complete lack of personal autonomy. From the moment a slave awoke to the moment they collapsed from exhaustion, their day was dictated by the whims of their masters, with no room for personal desires, rest, or ambition. In the sprawling cities of Rome, the countryside estates, and the brutal environments of the mines, the experience of slavery varied, but one truth remained constant. Life as a slave was a life without freedom. A Roman slave's day began before dawn. In the grand villas of wealthy patricians, household slaves were responsible for waking before their masters to prepare the day's necessities. They lit the lamps, fetched water, and arranged the morning meal. For those in rural settings, the day began even earlier, as they were driven into the fields while the air was still cool. Overseers and slave drivers, often themselves slaves but given minor authority, ensured that no one dawdled. The life of a field slave was especially harsh, with brutal physical labor from the first light until dusk. The morning hours were filled with an endless array of duties. Household slaves cleaned, cooked, and attended to their masters' personal needs. Some were tasked with dressing their owners, arranging their hair, or even attending to the education of their children if they were literate. These slaves lived in close proximity to their masters, which afforded them slightly better conditions than those in the fields or the mines, but it also placed them under constant scrutiny. A misstep or perceived insolence could result in severe punishment. For the slaves who worked in the mines, the situation was beyond dire. They toiled in suffocating darkness, breathing in dust and swinging heavy tools in unbearable heat. The conditions were so deadly that slaves in the mines often did not live long. They were considered disposable labor, their lives bought and sold for the sole purpose of extracting wealth from the earth. Unlike household or even field slaves, they had no hope of manumission, no opportunity for advancement, and little chance of survival beyond a few years. By midday, slaves were often given a brief reprieve to consume whatever meager rations they were allotted. Their meals typically consisted of porridge made from cheap grains, sometimes supplemented with bread or vegetables if they were lucky. Household slaves occasionally had access to better scraps left behind by their masters, but for most, hunger was a constant companion. The midday rest, however, was never long. As soon as they had eaten, they were forced back to their duties. The afternoon was often more grueling than the morning. The Roman sun beat down mercilessly on those working outdoors, and there was no escape from the harsh conditions. Field slaves continued plowing, planting, or harvesting crops, driven by the ever-present threat of punishment. Household slaves attended to the continuous demands of their masters, whether it was preparing for an elaborate feast, running errands in the bustling city streets, or entertaining guests. In the grand halls of Rome, wealthy citizens reveled in luxury, their comfort built on the backs of the enslaved. Slaves poured wine, played music, and danced for the amusement of their owners, all the while knowing that any mistake could result in brutal consequences. As evening approached, there was no relief for the enslaved. While their masters reclined in dining rooms, feasting on exotic delicacies, the slaves remained in constant motion. They cleared away dishes, washed clothing, or continued to labor in the fields until the last rays of sunlight disappeared. For those who worked in workshops or businesses, the end of the day was marked by the closing of the shop, but their duties did not cease. They were expected to clean up, take inventory, and ensure everything was prepared for the next day. The night offered little solace. Many slaves were crammed into small, dark quarters, packed together in filthy conditions. Sleep was brief and often interrupted. In some cases, slaves were forced to remain on call throughout the night, should their masters require anything. Fear was an ever-present part of a slave's existence. Beatings, starvation, and public humiliation were common punishments for perceived disobedience. Some masters were more lenient, but many viewed slaves as less than human, treating them as mere property to be used and discarded at will. The life of a Roman slave was defined by endless toil, harsh punishments, and a complete lack of personal freedom. Every day was a grueling cycle of labor, fear, and suffering, with little opportunity for rest or relief. From the grand villas of wealthy patricians to the vast agricultural estates and the treacherous depths of Roman mines, the experience of slavery varied, but the fundamental reality remained the same. Slaves were at the mercy of their masters, forced to endure relentless hardship. In the luxurious homes of Rome's elite, household slaves worked from before dawn until late into the night, attending to every need of their owners. They cooked elaborate meals, cleaned vast homes, cared for their masters' children, and even performed personal tasks such as dressing and grooming their owners. Despite working in relatively better conditions compared to field or mine slaves, their lives were still fraught with fear. Any mistake or perceived insolence could lead to severe punishment, from beatings to public humiliation. Their constant proximity to their masters meant they were under relentless scrutiny, leaving no room for mistakes. For those condemned to work on the sprawling agricultural estates, life was even harsher. The Roman countryside was home to large plantations known as latifundia, where slaves toiled under the scorching sun, plowing fields, harvesting crops, and tending to livestock. Overseers, often brutal and unforgiving, ensured that every moment of their day was spent working. They wielded whips to keep the slaves in line, and any sign of resistance was met with swift and cruel punishment. Hunger, exhaustion, and disease were common, and few slaves on these estates ever saw a chance for freedom. Perhaps the worst fate of all was reserved for those sent to labor in the mines. Roman mines were notorious for their inhumane conditions, where slaves were forced to work deep underground, breathing in dust, swinging heavy tools, and enduring unbearable heat. The life expectancy of a mine slave was shockingly short, as accidents, respiratory diseases, and sheer exhaustion claimed their lives. Unlike household or field slaves, who might occasionally interact with their masters, those in the mines were considered completely disposable, used until they could no longer work and then replaced without a second thought.